I used to think of music as something my daughter Lily needed to fill her schedule, an extracurricular activity like a blank space on the calendar that had to be filled. Our lives ran like a well-oiled machine, without fail, without pause. My husband James worked long hours every day, and I was busy picking up, dropping off, cleaning, making dinner, and sometimes trying to recall when we had last had a real conversation. It was James who suggested Lily take piano lessons for a very reasonable reason. It's good for the brain and helps with concentration. He also said it would be more convenient to have a tutor come to our house, since neither of us had time to take her to a music centre. I agreed without thinking much about it because it made sense. Everything in our family was sensible, and so Ethan appeared one Monday afternoon, right on time, not too early, not too late, standing at the door with an old leather bag and a polite look. He was about 30 taller than I expected, and had a quiet air about him. Not shy, but a calmness that naturally made others lower their voices when speaking. I didn't pay much attention to him at the time. He was just my daughter's music teacher. Nothing more, nothing less. I didn't expect that this assumption would blind me to what was to come. The first week passed smoothly, even somewhat vaguely. Ethan always arrived on time, always nodded at me with a smile that was just enough not too friendly but not indifferent. I would usually make a pot of tea and retreat to the kitchen or upstairs, leaving him and Lily alone in the living room. I never stayed to listen, never interrupted the lesson, partly because I was busy, partly because I thought it was the children's world, a space where I had no reason to interfere. Like so much else in this house, I stood outside playing the role of keeping things running, but never being part of anything. Until one rainy afternoon, I remember the patter of rain on the eaves and the dim light filtering through the steamed-up windows. Lily had a slight fever after a rainy gym class, and had taken a day off from piano lessons. But I had forgotten to text Ethan. When the doorbell rang, I remembered. He was standing there a little wet, his leather bag hanging from his shoulder and a few drops of rain in his hair that hadn't dried yet. I was a little embarrassed. It was too late to tell him to come back, and leaving him standing in the rain felt too cold. "Come in and have some tea to warm up," I said almost reflexively. And he nodded. We sat in the living room. No piano, no Lily, no clear role to cling to. At first the conversation was just small talk. The weather, the piano, Lily's ear for sound. Then there was a long pause, not awkward, but not comfortable either. I could hear the rain falling more clearly through the window, and then I sensed something strange. His gaze on me. Not the gaze of a teacher toward a parent, not the gaze of a man flirting, but a gaze that made me feel truly seen, not as a role, not out of obligation, just as a person present. That feeling confused me more than any words. It had been a long time since my heart had raced just because someone looked at me for so long. I don't remember exactly what we said after that, only the way the atmosphere changed, as if a door had opened, letting in a breeze I wasn't prepared for. After that afternoon, things continued the same, but not quite. I began to pay attention to the sound of the piano when Ethan taught. I could hear the chords, the pauses between the pieces. Once when Lily played something wrong, Ethan corrected her with a strange melody I had never heard before. It wasn't part of the lesson, but it made me choke up, not because the music was sad, but because I felt like he was playing it just for me without saying it, without hinting at it, just sending something he knew I would understand. That evening I sat at the dinner table as usual. James talked about the project, the company, the market. I nodded, smiled, poured wine. Every gesture perfect, every moment. Right? But inside that melody still echoed, and that look lingered. I began to understand. There are things that don't need to touch, to break people, I began to stay longer during piano lessons. At first, I'd just stand near the door, pretending to mop the floor or bring tea. Then I'd sit in the farthest chair in the room, pretending to read while Lily practiced. I told myself it was because I wanted to observe her progress, that I cared about her progress. But in truth, I knew it was an excuse. What I wanted to hear was not just the sound of the keys, but the vague emotion that echoed in the silences of the music. And what I wanted to see was Ethan not as a man, but as a mirror. A reflection of the feminine side of me that I had long forgotten existed. I had taken piano lessons as a child. Not for long, just a few years before dropping Alant out. My mother had always insisted that music would build my resume for college. No one in the family really wanted to hear me play. I don't remember how I fell in love with music, but I do remember the feeling of being lost when I realized the notes I played were just a duty. Not something that moved anyone. I stopped playing after that, and gradually forgot what it felt like to do something, just because I loved it. Not because I had to or to please someone else. One afternoon, Lily was tired and couldn't practice for long. Ethan told her to rest, then sat at the piano and quietly played a piece that wasn't in the syllabus. I didn't know its name. It had no clear melody, just a series of soft sounds, sad, but not melancholy, as light as a suppressed sigh. I sat there, my hands still smelling of cinnamon from the apple pie I had just made, and I suddenly felt like I was retreating into the young girl who kept a diary every night, who fantasized about candlelit dates, who wanted to do something for herself, not for anyone else. Ethan didn't look at me the entire time he played, but on the last note, as the sound faded into the air, he tilted his head slightly, his eyes flickering to me for a moment, and just like that, like an invisible touch, I felt my heartbeat quicken, not because of him, but because of the feeling of being alive again, of being felt, of being present. That night, over dinner, James told me about a difficult client, a 4-hour meeting, an upcoming business trip. I listened as usual, still the calm wife, the family woman. Everyone thought was fine. But in my head, the melody was still playing, and those eyes were still visible. Something inside me woke up. A few days later, Lily had a test at school, and I texted Ethan to cancel the lesson. He replied within minutes. I understand it's okay, but honestly, I'm going to miss that room a little. I looked at the message, my finger hovering over the screen. I didn't intend to reply, but I pressed send anyway. The room is still here. It's just quieter. As soon as the message was sent, my heart beat faster than I could understand. Not out of fear, but from a strange kind of excitement, as if I had just crossed an invisible boundary I had set for myself over the years. A few minutes later, Ethan replied, "Sometimes it's the silence that makes people hear things they never dared to listen to." I sat motionless, my eyes glued to the screen. Not a single confession, not a single word crossed the line, but each word, each dot seemed to tap into the deepest places in my heart where I had hidden my true feelings to become a proper wife. Since those messages, I began to pay more attention to things, not because they changed, but because I changed. Whenever James talked about work, I still nodded, smiled at the right times, made his morning coffee, and asked him what colour shirt he wanted. But inside, everything was starting to go wrong, like a piece of music going off key. Then another, until the whole thing no longer fit together as it once did. Only no one noticed. Or if they did, they pretended they didn't. One night after Lily had gone to bed, I sat in the living room reading. Not really reading, just holding the book as an excuse not to do anything else. The wind from the porch blew in through the half-open window. I didn't turn on the big lights, just the dim yellow glow of the desk lamp. It was warm enough to make me feel safe, dark enough to hide what I wasn't ready to face. The phone pinged Ethan. Pinged. The message wasn't long, but it made me pause for a long time. I shouldn't have sent this message. But today you've been silent for a long time, and I think silence is sometimes a way to say something. I looked at the message, then at myself in the mirror across from me. A neat, gentle woman. Okay enough. But that gaze no longer had the life it once did. I texted back. Sometimes I wish I was still the person someone wanted to write a song for. No emojis, no exclamation marks. Just a sentence that came from the deepest place. Honest to the point of being naked. 10 minutes later he replied, "You have no idea how many melodies you've inspired that I never dared to play." I put the phone down on the table. Not out of panic, not out of guilt, but because I knew from that moment on, I could no longer go back to being the woman I was. I was still living in this house, still doing everything a good wife and mother should do, but inside a part of me had opened its eyes and didn't want to close them again. The next morning, I got up early to make coffee, as I did every day. James walked into the kitchen, his tie a little crooked, reaching for the cup. "You woke up too early," he said. His voice still hazy from sleep. I smiled, handed him the cup. "Couldn't sleep?" He didn't ask. Why didn't look at me for long, just nodded as if it were normal. But right before he walked out of the kitchen, he paused, then turned back, asking in a soft voice, "Have you been staying behind during Lily's piano lessons lately?" I paused. The question seemed harmless, but it sent a chill down my spine. Sometimes I said softly, "I find music soothing." He said nothing more, but that look, no accusation, no doubt made me feel seen. It was more uncomfortable than any jealousy, because it made me realize James hadn't lost his flair. He had just gotten so used to not asking questions. Lily went to bed early that afternoon with a headache. I lay reading but couldn't concentrate, as if every word echoed the voice in my head. The voice I had ignored for years. Then the phone pinged a text from Ethan. "I finished the song the other day, but I don't think I'll ever play it for anyone but you." I bit my lip, then texted back, "Do you ever get tired of keeping it all inside?" He replied almost immediately, "I am, but I keep it, because if I let it go, I'm afraid there's no way back." I sat there for a long time not texting back, just looking up at the ceiling and wondering, am I still in a marriage? Or am I just repeating a beautiful, emotionally drained habit? After that text, I began to see the phone as a dangerous door. Small, silent, but always capable of opening to a place I didn't know if I dared to enter. I didn't text again for a few days, not because I wanted to stop, but because I didn't know how to continue. James still went to work early, came home late. Lily was well again, and the piano lessons continued regularly. But the atmosphere in the house was different. Not because anyone had changed, but because I knew I was changing. I sat through the lesson that day. Lily was more focused than usual, and I stopped pretending to be doing anything else. I just sat there looking at Ethan, but not directly at him. Sometimes, when Lily played wrong, he gently adjusted her fingers, then played the piece. The notes were the same, but under his fingers they carried an indescribable feeling. A feeling I had long thought dead. When the lesson ended, Lily said goodbye to him and ran upstairs. I sat there, my hands on my knees, my palms shaking slightly. Ethan stood up, folded his papers, and as he turned to leave, he paused. "I'll send you the music if you want," he said, his voice so low and soft I thought I'd misheard. I looked up. "I'm not sure I should listen to it again," I whispered. He didn't reply, just nodded and walked out the door. But in that moment I knew we both understood we had taken a step forward, though neither of us had said anything specific. That evening as I made tea, the phone pinged again. "Ethan, I'm writing a new piece, but every time I touch the keys, I think of you." I looked at the words as if they were a deep lake, not entirely clear, not beyond the limit. But in their silence, there was a persistent, real call that made me want to cry. I don't know why, but I wrote back. I thought a part of me had died a long time ago, but you woke it up. The message was sent, and I withdrew my hand, my heart pounding like a child who had done something wrong. I waited 5 minutes, 10 minutes, then 13 minutes later. Ethan texted back, "I don't know what to do with this, but I know I can't ignore it." I put the phone down and went out onto the balcony, letting the cold wind soothe the layers of emotions rising in my chest. I looked out at the backyard where James had planted hydrangeas for me in the first year of our marriage. They were still there, green and full, but I felt nothing when I looked at them anymore. Not sad, not happy, just something beautiful that had fallen from my heart without me realizing it. That night I lay beside James as usual. He was still sleeping on his left side, his breathing even and warm. I looked up at the ceiling, my phone face down on the nightstand. No more messages, but I didn't need any more words. I knew there was something between Ethan and me that went beyond words, something nameless, but very real. And that was what scared me, because I began to wonder what was worse, a physical betrayal, or a heart that was slowly leaving without the other person knowing. I don't know why I left the house so early that Saturday morning. James was in a video conference with an investment group from Europe, and Lily was sleeping in after a stressful week of classes. I planned to stop by the bakery, then go home for lunch. But somehow my feet took me to the park north of town, where I knew there would be a small performance by Ethan's students. I didn't tell anyone I was going. There was no clear reason. Maybe curiosity, maybe an indescribable urge. But deep down I thought I just wanted a weekend morning without being a mother, a wife, or the one who arranged everything. I just wanted to be me, a quiet woman in the crowd with no one knowing my name, no one calling me responsible. Ethan was standing in the middle of the group of students, adjusting the piano bench, tying a little girl's hair, checking each mini piano, and nodding to the parents. He didn't see me right away. I stood hidden under a large tree as quiet as a passing audience, but my heart was pounding, as if this was the first time I had seen him. When his eyes finally swept across the crowd and landed on me, there was no surprise, no smile, just a slight nod. Enough for me to understand he knew I would come, and I knew he didn't need to ask why. The show passed smoothly. The children played the piano with cute innocence. The parents applauded, and the cameras recorded every moment. I stood far away, not approaching, nothing in my hands. No one beside me. But I had never felt so present as I did then. As people began to leave, Ethan addressed each parent, then turned back to the stage area. Then he walked toward me. No touching, no inviting, but that look. Still the look that made me forget who I was. Amid all the titles I had carried. "You shouldn't have come here," he said softly without reproach. I nodded, looking toward the empty seats. "I know," I said, "but I came." There was a long silence between us, stretched like a string that had just been tuned high. Not broken, but with just one more touch. It could produce a sound that couldn't be hidden. Then he asked, his voice low, "What do you expect from me?" "Emma," I didn't answer right away. The question wasn't simple. I didn't expect Ethan to quit, didn't expect him to say he loved me, and certainly didn't expect a movie-like ending. I just wanted to know if what I felt was real, or if it was an illusion I was creating to escape a life that was too safe. "I don't want anything," I said. "I just want to know if there's a part of me that hasn't died yet." Ethan let out a deep breath, as if he had been carrying an unnamed feeling all this time, and now it was taking form in words. "You're still there," he said. "You just forgot how to come out." I looked at him. His eyes didn't wait, didn't push, but they didn't hide either. There was a gentle frankness, something I had rarely seen in years. And if I did come out, I asked my voice so low that only the wind could hear it. Would everything fall apart? He didn't answer, because we both knew the question wasn't his anymore. That night I had dinner with my family as usual. Lily talked about school. James asked a few questions and the atmosphere seemed cheerful. But when I looked at James, the man I had lived with for nearly 2 decades, I wondered, had he ever really seen me? Or had he just seen the image of a proper wife? He had become so familiar with that he no longer needed to look closely. After Lily fell asleep, I sat alone in the living room. No music, no text messages, no one watching me from behind. Just me, with myself. And for the first time in a long time, I felt I could no longer hide. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay next to James, listening to his steady breathing, the light from the nightlight casting a shadow on the ceiling, reflecting a part of his face that was all too familiar, was all too. That man had never betrayed me, never yelled at me, never left me, never hurt me, at least not in the way people usually define it. But he was the one who had gradually forgotten who I was, or perhaps never really knew. I turned around and looked out the window. The stars outside were twinkling, reminding me that there was another world beyond the peaceful home, beyond the punctual meals, beyond the familiar but insincere questions. I began to understand that peace is not always happiness. Sometimes peace is a form of prolonged silence where 2 people live together, but each is immersed in their own world, and no one tries to enter the other's world anymore. The next morning I woke up early as usual. I made coffee, put the cup by the stove, checked Lily's bag, folded the napkin, and then stood still for a long time in that small kitchen. James came down, still wearing his familiar silver-grey tie. But today he looked at me longer. There was something in his eyes worried, confused, and maybe scared. Not because he knew anything specific, but because he felt I was no longer where I was. "Are you okay?" he asked, a simple question that made me choke up. I nodded, smiling slightly. Fine. But I knew we both understood that fine no longer meant what it used to. He put his hand on my shoulder gently, not squeezing, as if afraid that if he pressed a little harder I would break. "What's wrong?" "Emma." I looked into his eyes, and for the first time in a long time, I couldn't find an answer, because I didn't know what was happening inside me anymore. I didn't say anything, just took a step back and walked out. I don't know why I came back to the park that day. There was no show, no Ethan, but I still stood under the same tree where he had seen me in the crowd. I closed my eyes, listening to the wind, to the footsteps of strangers passing by, and I realized there are moments in life when you don't need anyone to say another word, because you've heard enough to understand who you are, and that you no longer want to continue living like a shadow passing through days of repetition. That night I sat in the living room pouring myself a glass of wine. There was no music, no text from Ethan, no eyes on me. But I was no longer the woman I was a month ago. I was Emma, not James's wife, not just Lily's mother. I was a woman who once longed to be seen, felt heard. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Didn't know if this marriage could find its old warmth. Wasn't sure if I would ever see Ethan again, but I knew one thing and one thing only: I would not live another day just to survive.